Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Whitmix's webinar, How to Do All-on-4 Mouth Conversions with Mark Williamson. My name is Bernie Jaroslaw. I'm the marketing manager for Whitmix, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. So I want to begin with a couple housekeeping items. First, you should see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen a questions box. Please feel free to use that. Put your questions in there. We won't be answering them till the end, but I will read them to Mark and he will answer them verbally. So feel free to ask away. Next, if you are a CDT, the webinar is approved for 1 hour of CE credit towards your recertification. You'll receive an email within a day or so that will tell you exactly how to obtain your credit, and you'll take a very simple test, so listen carefully, and then we'll get you your certificate. Lastly, it is being recorded, so within about a day or two, it'll be up on the Whitmix website in the webinar section or in our YouTube channel. So you just type Whitmix in YouTube and all our videos will come up. So this morning I have the pleasure of introducing Mark Williamson. Mark is a CDT, DTG, and a member of the Dental Technicians Guild, and currently the Senior Technical Manager for Ottawa Dental Lab in Ottawa, Illinois. He has 37 years of experience in dentures, implants, partials, and ceramics. His certification is in full dentures, and he's also a COIS recognized specialist. And I also have the pleasure of announcing that Mark was named Technician of the Year by his peers at NADL's Vision 21 meeting. I think it was 2 years ago, I could be wrong. After 7 years as an apprentice in a boutique removable lab, he and his wife, Allie, founded Essex Dental Laboratory, a full-service lab they ran for 13, 14 years. In 2007, Mark and Allie merged their business with Ottawa Dental Lab, where they've been part of the Ottawa family to this day. Mark's an experienced chairside all-on-4 specialist and teaches other technicians to master chairside conversions. His latest success came in September 2017 when he was announced first place winner of the Panthera Dental Masters Cup. So today in his webinar, Mark will focus on exploring new ways to achieve optimal dentist, surgeon, technician teamwork using digital communication and design and new shared responsibilities. So that's a long intro, Mark. That's all I've got, though. So if you're ready, let's talk about all-on-4 conversions. Welcome, Mark.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Bernie and Whitmix, for having me do the webinar. I'm excited about it. And I've got a lot to cover in this 45 minutes to an hour here. So let's get right at it. You know, there are different ways of doing these all-on-4 conversions. What I'm going to show you is kind of a basic technique that's used quite a bit. There are different ways of doing this. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that if we have time. But let me start with what we typically do. We have probably about 7 or 8 people that can go out and do all-on-4 conversions. And so there might be times where 3 or 4 people are out a day doing these. And never in my dreams thought that I would be chairside helping surgeons and doctors, you know, chairside during surgery, being out of the laboratory. So, let's get to it. Let's start here. So a lot of questions that I get is, how long does this usually take? Well, typical surgery with conversion time could be anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. If it's a dual arch, it could be longer, obviously. But really, the surgery takes about 2 to 3 hours, and the conversion can take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. It can be quicker with different techniques, but I think learning some of the basics and going through the technique that I do will kind of help you with that. And then when you get, like I said, I think there's a smart denture conversion that's getting very popular out there. But I think learning the basics first is very important, so you understand the whole process. Nobel Biocare has some information that you can get. I think there's plenty of YouTube videos and things like that. And like Bernie said, this webinar will be available for future for you to take a look at. So typically it starts with some sort of a denture, if it's an economy denture, a standard denture. And then what we do is we duplicate it in a clear, and we do trough out the lingual, we cut the flange, and I'll go into that a little bit more. These are what they kind of look like the day of surgery. It looks like they've been through war a little bit, you know, with the pickup material. But typically, this is what it'll kind of look like, I think, once you get a little bit more experience with this. This will definitely look a lot better. But typically, the day of surgery, and I believe this photo here might have been done by a doctor chairside that I had gotten from one of my clients. So sometimes, you know, this particular patient, this is how they presented themselves, and this is what they can look like when they're leaving that day. It's a big transformation. Patients get very emotional sometimes at the end. They're hugging you, they're crying. Their family members are shocked and happy. And it's a really nice feeling when I'm leaving there, packing up my kit and going, that I was able to be a part of something and help a patient's way of life. So let's look at the conversion process. This is kind of a video. I'm going to try to go through it because it's kind of a little bit of a longer video here. But basically, this is how this patient presented. And this patient is in the chair. We'll look. This may be a little bit graphic. So if you don't want to see blood or the tissue flapped or an implant going in, you know, just wanted to warn you. But typically, they're going through grafts. We'll go ahead and look at CT scans, and we'll just kind of help sometimes doctors, you know, kind of plan for the procedure. Sometimes we do fully guided systems, and you will need that. Let me see if I could speed up here a little bit. So here what they're doing, here what they're doing is kind of marking the VDO. I turned the sound up. I hope that's okay. So they're going to go ahead and make a mark on the nose. They're going to make a mark on the chin, have the patient bite down and restore the vertical. The teeth have now been extracted. The tissue has been reflected, and now they're going to go ahead and do some bone reduction. Abutoplasty will be done. This is the clear surgical guide that they're using, and you could see at the edge of the flange, the bone is up into the denture base, and that bone needs to be reduced level with that flange. That flange is marked 15 millimeters from the incisal edge down to the edge of that clear denture. And they'll go ahead and do their bone reduction here. You could see irrigating that. And then they'll put the surgical guide back in, surgical stent, however you want to call it. You can see maybe on the left-hand side there, maybe that bone needs to be reduced a little bit more. But typically this is what you see. A lot of times I'm not involved with this. Obviously it's between the surgeon or the person, the dentist that might be placing the implants. But they're going to go ahead and drill their primary access drill, and then they'll go ahead and step it up. Let me speed this up here a little bit. So this will be the implant that's going in. This looks like a Nobel tapered conical connection. It's an aggressive thread, because what you want to do is you want to get stability with these implants. You want those implants to be very secure. All right, let's go ahead and move forward. Now we're just checking to see with the cleared group. There's the trough that we had created. The multi-unit abutments are positioned, and now we're ready to start the conversion process. So sometimes before they suture, they'll have us go in and we can take a wash impression inside the denture to kind of orientate, tell us where to drill the access holes for the temporary copings that we're going to be utilizing. So here the wash is being applied. It will be seated. And while I take this now back, not to the lab, but I use a lab in their office or one of the surgical rooms that we can use. And what I'll do then while they're suturing is I will go ahead and create the access holes. And we're going to allow for temporary copings to be placed. And here's one of the temporary copings. Again, this happens to be Nobel temp coping. And those will be positioned. And what we're trying to do is get the denture to fit over passively through the denture with the 4 access holes for those chimneys to fit through. So here, we're going to go ahead and open that up. We want that to fit over. Go ahead and we rinse that. And then we're going to try that in the patient's mouth to fit over. And we want that to be able, patient to be able to bite into occlusion, no interference from the temp coping. Sometimes those temp copings might be a little high and you have to cut those down. But typically if you're cutting them down, that means you don't necessarily have enough room, restorative space wise. So that could be an issue. If you're just cutting them down, you know, maybe 1 millimeter or so, maybe 2, you may be fine. But if you're cutting them quite a bit, then that means there wasn't enough bone reduction done. So here we're going to place a rubber dam. The access holes are going to be blocked out. And then now we use a chair-side pickup material. In this particular video, they're using a material called Muco Hard. I don't use that anymore. I use a Voco material called Poofy Gel. And then I also use a GC Trad material for finalizing and securing the acrylic. And I'll show you that as we get through it. So the material is now, the denture is now set with the material in there. It's almost like what you're doing is relining to compensate for the alveolar and for picking up the temporary copings. So once that material has set, we're going to go ahead and unscrew that, and then the actual now conversion can be done. At this point, what I do is I like to make sure those temporary copings are solid before I take it back and make sure the screws are out. The doctor has the screws. For the conversion process, I don't need the screws, and then the temporary coping healing caps are put on while the conversion. At this point, this takes me probably 45 minutes to an hour to do the complete conversion. What we're doing here is backfilling in with acrylic, and we want to fill in, we don't want a concavity, we want more of a convexity, and we want to make sure that those temporary copings are completely sealed with acrylic. Sometimes when you do a pickup, sometimes there can be an air bubble, you know, a little void, but I go ahead and that GC Trad, what's nice about it, it's a really fine powder, and it flows really nice once you kind of wet your brush with monomer and pick it up. And it really seeps down in there. It works really well. I haven't had any issues with that. So here, we're just going through the basic finishing and contouring. We're going to cut off flanges. And then we'll pumice it and polish it. And that's kind of how that looks at the end. I remember when we do these conversions, doctors are kind of waiting. The patient, you know, maybe the surgery took a while. Maybe the patient was under. Maybe there was an anesthesiologist there, put the patient out completely. And so sometimes they're in a hurry. They want to get these in and get the patient home. They've been in the chair for, you know, 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes. And so we want to get this done. You don't want to take your time. And so this is the conversion. You finished in the mouth and a doctor checking the bite. So let's proceed with this. We'll go in a little bit more depth here. So basically, like I said, it will start with an immediate denture. We have to have a denture to utilize for the conversion. We want to make sure that when we get the case from the doctor, it's the same thing as if you're making a denture that's not being utilized for an all-on-4. We want to make sure, are we keeping the same VDO? Are we maintaining it, changing it? What's the level of plane of occlusion? Are we altering that? Are we increasing tooth display or decreasing tooth display? These are things you're going to want to ask. So here we have a patient who's been presented here. Another patient, some scans. And here the doctor's we talked about what incisal edge we're going to use, and we wanted to use number 24 as our incisal edge. And you can see that I drew a line towards the vestibule there, and I marked 15, because that's approximately how much space we're going to need for this final restoration. So I'm just kind of getting an idea of where I need to be. Sometimes you have technicians that'll cut all of that stone away and make the denture to that line to increase the acrylic strength and things like that. I get that. But sometimes you don't know if doctors are going to take that much. They should, but sometimes if they don't, now you have this thick denture. You could be opening the vertical. So when I make these dentures and make them for conversions, I do maybe a little tooth extractions, kind of round off the cast. I might take it 2 millimeters below the gingival margin of the tooth, and then I make a regular denture. I know I'm going to reline it. I'm going to be building that up anyway. I just don't know how much bone they're going to take, but at least it gives me an idea. You can see here with the case. In this particular case, what we want, we're making an upper and lower denture. Sometimes these patients are already edentulous, sometimes they're not. Some of the photos I like to have to communicate what we need for any sort of restorative case. These are the photos that we would like. We would like a full face, a lip at repose, a full smile, right lateral, left lateral, and occlusal table with the retraction open about 10 millimeters. So here you could see, obviously, I probably wouldn't need photos for this. Once I got the cast, I would know obviously 11 is super erupted and, probably not following that, but it still helps with the communication. Same here. Are we doing a lower? Obviously, where am I placing that incisal edge for the lower? These are things you'll want to know. You can have the doctor send you any sort of impression for the upper and lower. They can be alginate, whatever you like. The Accudent system's a really nice system that I like. Any sort of bite registration, if the patient's edentulous, right? We still want to get a bite rim. We want to know, we want to get an accurate bite registration for our jaw relations. We can get a face bow. Sometimes I get that, sometimes I don't. In this particular case here, the doctor kind of cut the incisal edge on number 9 and wanted me to use that for the incisal edge, and 12 millimeters to the CEJ. So we kind of set this case up according to what they wanted without losing our reference, kind of did it in stages. And again, this is that clear guide that we talk about. So you can kind of see in this picture that the flange has been cut from the incisal edge or occlusal plane to the edge of the flange toward the vestibular. I cut that at 15 millimeters. This gives the doctor or the surgeon a visual right away to put it in if they've reduced enough bone or not. I did put a slice, a 30-degree angle slice on the facial that if the doctor's freehanding that and they want to, for their posteriors implants, these are typically put in at an angle, 30-degree angle for the typical all-on-4 technique. Some doctors do it straight, some may not angle it, but this particular doctor wanted us to put the groove in there for them to help them kind of eyeball and getting that angulation 30 degrees. So here it shows 16 millimeters, but I'm measuring from the 1. So this is our 15 millimeters in height that I talk about. This particular patient was able to try this in because they were edentulous. The doctor tried this in before surgery just to make sure the fit and the bite is correct. You could see the anterior flange has been cut. And then this is the day of surgery after the all-on-4 has been completed. Again, the biggest mistake that I see here is not enough bone reduction. I think a lot of you technicians understand that, right? When we get a case and we want to make a, full, all-on-4 hybrid, or maybe we want to do crystal ultra, maybe you want to use pectin and or you know, with individual crowns and being composite, you know, especially when you're using these resin type substructures, you definitely need that space for restorative, for strength, so that bar substructure is not compromised. So the biggest thing I tell doctors is that we got to make sure we have the enough bone reduction. And I measure from the I don't measure from the top of the implant. I like to have them measure from the crest of the tissue to the occlusal plane, because that's our restorative space. If the implant submerged 4 millimeters or 2 millimeters or 5, you know, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because that's not necessarily my restorative space. My restorative space is once I've got the case mounted, and then I can measure that interocclusal space. And then this is what we talked about for marking the VDO, this longer method, you know, of determining the interocclusal distance. I'm sure a lot of you kind of already know that, but these are things that are done the day of surgery. The patient, before they even start, they're marking this, taking these measurements. So we go ahead and we put in our denture and we're ready to do the conversion. We want to make sure we don't lose that. We don't want to overclose and lose our vertical dimension, nor do we want to really open them quite a bit. Now, if the doctor says, hey, I want to go ahead and open them 1 millimeter or 2, okay, at least we have a reference point and we can do that. Here, this is that flange, again, kind of showing where we are for our bone height. This is a pin I put in the implant to kind of show our angulation, to kind of help us, okay, are we going to put in a straight multi-unit abutment now that goes on top of these, or are we going to use an angled multi-unit abutment? And I'll show you that too. So in this particular case, these were straights that they used. On the bottom right, you can see the 4 there. Those are all straight abutments. And you'll know also, with, especially with the Nobel, like with the yellow handle, those are for straight, and then the multi-unit angled abutments will have a metal handle, and I'll show you that too. So we know All-on-4's work. We know it's an immediate function. You know, with the 10-year follow-up, the implant survival rate's 90 to 100%, anywhere from 4 to 8 implants. We want to make sure that these implants have a 30 Newton centimeters of torque for us to go ahead. If you have anything less, then the patient will just wear a denture during the healing phase over these healing caps. You can soft reline it. You can use any sort of like co-comfort or hydrocast or something like that to reline and let the patient wear while the implants integrate. So again, we would like an implant at least 10 millimeters in length for immediate loading, the 35 Newton centimeters that we talked about, cross-arch stabilization. That's why we have all 4, that 4 or more. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. Just depends on the case and the doctor, their decision. And we don't want any cantilevers. So when you do these conversions, make sure you cut off the cantilevers, and I'll show you that. We don't want any forces on that. This is the implant that we talked about. Obviously, there's a lot of other players in the game now that have aggressive implants, tapered implants. Aggressive meaning kind of an aggressive thread pattern that kind of helps get torque and that bone to integrate, or to, I don't want to say integrate, but to get torque and really be stable, so you get that 35 Newton centimeters. So you can go ahead and restore that day. Now, I've done a lot of these. I don't know how many hundreds or thousands I've done of these conversions, but typically it's only been, you know, maybe I can count on both hands that when we weren't able to do the conversion and we had patient had to wear a denture home after surgery. And the patients are aware of that, or at least they should be made aware of that. But that's, you know, obviously up to the doctor and to the surgeon to let them know. Typically, patients want to leave with something screwed in so they can heal. You know, they don't have to deal with a denture. So these are the multi-units that go on. Usually in the anterior, we're using a straight maybe a 17-degree angled abutment you might use in the anterior. Just depends on the implant placement and the angulation. And in the posterior, for a typical all-on-4, they have the 30-degree multi-unit abutment that goes on to correct it. So that way your access holes, your restorative screws are coming through the occlusal access, not through a facial access. So doctors will ask you or help for your opinion on positioning these multi-unit abutments sometimes. So you may have to get in there and look, and I typically have them put the clear dupe in with the trough, making sure that patient it's seated completely, patient bites down, and we're making sure that those multi-unit abutments, the screw access holes for the restorative screws, are coming through the trough, coming through occlusally. Because you don't, I mean, you can do it through the facial, sometimes that's happened, but you want to do it now and get that multi-unit abutment corrected at time of surgery. It's a lot easier than trying to do it when you go to do the restorative, okay? So they have all the different parts. This is the design of it, of the multi-unit abutments. And like I said, years ago, a lot of these, you know, Nobel was kind of the only player, but now you have Straumann in it, you have BioHorizons that you can do it with. I mean, all the major implant companies now, for the most part, have these parts and pieces to go ahead and do these full arch restorative cases. As far as color, height, and, you know, ability, they have all that. Typically that's left up to the surgeon and the restorative doctor. These parts and pieces are typically supplied by the doctor. I'm not usually bringing them, but I wanted to kind of explain this and show to you what the parts and pieces are. So here's one of the packages for a straight. You can see it has a hex head on top, and that's the yellow handle that the doctor uses it to carry it to the mouth. Go ahead and start screwing that in. Pull the yellow cap off, and then they have a certain torque wrench that they'll use that fits the top of that hex, and that can be tightened to 35 Newton centimeters. And there's the driver there that fits over it to tighten it. So the multi-unit abutment, angled abutment here, you can see it has a metal handle that screws in right to where the restorative screw was screwed to the top. There's screws, both of them, the restorative screw and this screw to tighten a multi-unit abutment, that's only a 15 Newton centimeters torque. Even though it's still a bigger screw, you would think you could do maybe 30, 35. It's not. It is 15. You can see they're seated. We want to make sure that those handles are coming through occlusally. That's why we have that trough. It works so well. So here you can see in the pictures, they're seated. I like to have that doctor do an x-ray, making sure everything's down and seated completely. This is just kind of a quick little video here of a doctor going ahead and trying to position the multi-unit abutment. They will probably go ahead and, I think, they might have put on the clear surgical dupe in this video. But they also have to trephine around that implant possibly to get rid of any sort of bone that might be in the way, keeping that multi-unit abutment seated. You can see here the doctor's turning that implant a little bit because I believe this is a Nobel replace trilobe, and I think they're trying to get that to line up a little bit better than what they previously had. And once that's seated, then they'll use a torque driver to go ahead and screw that down, okay? So again, with the different heights, you know, at the day of surgery, a lot of the tissue sutured, might be covering part of that. But once that's healed and, you know, patient comes in for final impression, you can see how well it's healed up and that the abutments are at tissue level. That's what you want for the ease. And typically, I see as far as gingival height on these are about 3 millimeter, 3.5 millimeter. I also asked, well, what do you take with the office to you when you're going to do these? So I have a rolling toolbox that I have everything that I would need. The only thing that's not pictured in here is I do put a bench lathe down in the bottom where the right-hand side, where that handpiece is. I put a bench lathe in there. I like doing that for pumicing and polishing, cutting off the maybe the palate, the cantilevers. I can put a burner and finish it. I just like having it. You don't have to. I know some techs that just use a handpiece, which is fine. And I do have a list of materials. If you contact me, I can give you a list of things that I use and what you may need. So feel free to reach out. I'll give you my number at the end here. So again, indexing the multi-unit abutments. It'll start typically, the surgeon may ask the tech to come in, say, okay, the patient's sutured, implants are in, multi-unit abutments are on, you're ready to go, and now I work with the restorative doctor. And I will basically help the restorative doctor go through this. A lot of times they've never done it before, so you're kind of hand-holding and helping, and you're working together. And so I'll have them take a wash impression inside the denture, seat it, have the patient bite down, make sure the bite lines up, and we're good to go. They take it out, and I'm gonna now go ahead and drill my access holes. Once I drill my access holes, while I'm doing that in the lab, I have the doctor go ahead and put 1 or 2 temp copings on, typically in the anterior. So that way, when I go in there, now we can go ahead and try seating this denture with the access holes. We wanna make sure it fits over. We wanna make sure that that the denture is not binding on those temporary cylinders in any way. So that's typically what I will have them do. So there's just a little video here of just showing, again, kind of doing this wash. Let's see here. Sorry, I stopped that. Bring that back here for you. So you can see this patient hasn't been sutured yet, obviously, so they are just checking the position. We're going to go ahead and do the wash. I can go ahead and do the access holes just to get that ready while they're suturing. Typically, I'm not doing the pickup of the conversion with those, with the flap open like that. Typically, it is sutured. I think I've done a handful of them that way and kind of built up the acrylic, but you'll find out as you do these, different dentists, different surgeons have different procedures. You know, might be a little bit different in certain ways. When you do enough of them, you'll kind of understand what I mean. But basically, like I said, Nobel, they kind of wrote the book on this, right, with Palomalo. And they have all the information you would need to kind of back up. They have all the science, they have all the papers on that. This is what the temporary copings are. Typically, what I'd like to do, try to do, is take these temporary copings and sandblast them before I go to the lab or to the office. That way they're kind of prepared. I find that the acrylic seems to bond better to that. Maybe use a metal primer from GC on it. I've done them without sandblasting it. You know, so it's definitely, you can do both ways. And I would keep some temporary copings and some screws with you, just in case you lose one, or the doctor or the assistant dropped a screw and you need another screw. You know, what I typically try to do is make sure before I'm going, the day or two before, I call the doctor, make sure we're still on, verify the time they want me there, what system we're using, so I can prepare and maybe bring some extra components for that system we're going to be using. So typically this is what we'll see with all 4 temp copings on. Now, one of the good practice is you could contact your Nobel rep and see if you can get some sort of a kit that lets you kind of handhold and work with the parts and pieces so you can familiarize yourself how that works. They can even give you a model. I don't know if there's a cost for it, for them to let you use that, or for the model. But you can make a denture off of it, and then you can do your own conversion at the laboratory before you go out. You know, you can go ahead and get some practice to understand these parts and pieces. You don't want to be chairside and they're relying on you, and you've never worked with the pieces, or you've never held them, you've never, you know, again, like, you're not going to be placing these multi-unit abutments. I get that, and you shouldn't be working in the patient's mouth. But at least understand it. I think with having these parts and pieces and kind of working through this, this is something that would really benefit you. So what I do is I would take a wash on that model just as I would, or we would when we're chairside. Go ahead and work with the temp copings, the screws, the prosthetic screws. I'd screw them on. I'd make sure my denture fits passive over that. And then I would go ahead and pick up. This is the material that I use. I use the Eufy Gel Hard C material. I really like that. They also have a chairside pickup you can use. I think Taub makes a material called Stellar. I mean, there's all different types of materials that are out there that you can use for pickup material. And then once the copings are picked up, then I use this Univast trad material from GC to flow in and build up my acrylic where needed. So typically then once the copings are on, the denture fits over passively, we're ready now to pick it up. We'll go ahead and put a rubber dam over that. I really don't use this horseshoe one sheet piece anymore. I bring the rubber dam and I cut the pieces beforehand, and I'll make like a round circle or a square, maybe this between the size of a nickel and a quarter. I'll be somewhere in between there, and I'll cut these and I'll punch. I have a punch that I punch a hole through it so we can slide each rubber dam piece over each cylinder. And what you're doing is trying to protect and cover the sutures when you do the pickup material. Again, we're relining, right? We're relining this denture. This denture was made with just teeth extracted, but now we've had bone reduction done. So now we need to fill that space. So when you do your pickup, you're relining and picking these up at the same time. So we don't want that material to grab on the suture. Now, has it happened? Yes. Can we get it off? Yes. Typically have to cut it, get in there. You won't be able to get the denture out until you cut it, but it has happened. It's not the end of the world, but we try our best not to do that. You can see here, this is the material. This is during the pickup phase. The material is now set, and we're gonna go ahead and remove it. Be careful when you peel out that rubber dam, because that will splash back at you. If there's blood on it, you can rinse it the best you can, but when you pull it, it can splash on you, so be careful. Wear scrubs, wear something that you can change out of. And then what I like to try to do, like I said, when I'm chairside, I try to remove that rubber dam piece. I take an Explorer, an instrument, and I'm making sure that those temp copings are solid. They don't have any mobility to them. They're not loose, because if you go ahead and cure it and do the conversion, and then when the doctor goes to put it in thinking, hey, this is going to be a slam dunk, and now they can't get that screw in because your temporary coping moved a little bit. So you want to make sure, and I do it in front of them so they can see. I don't want to take it back to the lab, do that, and then come back, go, oh, it's loose, and I don't want them to think that I dropped it or I caused it. I want them to see, look, this is where we're at, and so we need to put it back in with a little bit more material, and we need to pick that up again. So this is what it should look like. I bring Cavicide with me. I rinse it. I Cavicide it. I let it spray, and then let it sit for 3 minutes, and I do a rinse, and then I usually take my gloves off while I'm doing the conversion, because I want to, I'm using with rotary hand pieces and a bench lathe and things like that, and I don't want to have that, but it's up to your discretion. Again, here, the upper being picked up, same thing with the rubber dam. Now you can have, years ago, we used to use cotton pellets to kind of block this out. And after sometimes spending 30 minutes to try to retrieve a cotton pellet out of a cylinder because it got pushed down too far, and that would be kind of the last time you'll do that. But Teflon tape can work. Some doctors like using impression material. They just put an Explorer in there and pull it right out. It comes out nice and clean. Then the healing caps go back on while we're doing the conversion. So when you're going to add your trad acrylic, you don't want to do this. You don't want to get it into your interface of your temporary coping. You want to keep it below the polished margin, and you want to backfill around. You wait, like I said, we're not going to do leave any sort of concavity I want this appliance to be more convex, flat, rounded as possible. You can see here, this has maybe a little bit longer cantilever extension than what I would typically do. But in this particular photo, it is what it is. Sometimes doctors might say, hey, cantilever one tooth. And I'll say, well, typically we don't, but if you want, I understand, fine. As long as you're aware that if that does fracture, and it probably will, the patient will break that off and cause an issue. So, and we want to make sure we're about that 15 millimeter thickness. But again, you're at the mercy of the bone reduction that was done. So sometimes you may have it, sometimes you may have a little more, sometimes you may have less. So if you don't have a bench lathe, you want to do it with a hand piece, you could drill some perforations to help cut out the palate. This is typically what you'll want to do. Cut out that palate. These prostheses, conversion prostheses, are typically a little thicker than usual. The final restoration is probably going to be obviously thinner. We can get away with that because we'll have a metal substructure underneath at the time of making the final restoration. And also we just want to make sure we don't exceed 45 degrees. It's going to create a shelf. The patient's lips will get stuck up on the edge there. When they eat food, food will get caught up on there. We want to keep it as minimal as possible. So again, we're at the mercy of where the bone was reduced, where the tissue is, where the denture teeth are replaced for for aesthetics and their bite. So we want to contour and shape that acrylic as best we can to not create a shelf or a flange. This is typically what you'd like to get. And some of these pictures can be a little bit, it's hard to tell, but again, we're trying to keep the underneath side, the intago side, rounded, smooth, polished, highly polished. We don't want food collecting into it. So as far as the occlusal scheme, once this is done and the doctor's adjusting the bite, I mean, obviously your simultaneous bilateral contacts you want. We want to avoid any sort of cantilever. We want our lateral movements and a group function or guidance. We don't want it to hit hard on one tooth. We want to try more of a, at least I try to do more of a group function. Protrusive, we want to make sure patient can slide forward and in hitting, the centrals are hitting on the insides, edges of the lower a little evenly. You don't want one more than the other. You can adjust these lowers and, or these temporaries, I should say. You want to get these as close as possible. And then once they're ready to restore, if you want to increase the length or you want to adjust something or change something, by all means, you have the final to do that. Or you can even take their temporary and make adjustments and contour and shape it and get that temporary the way you want it for when you're going to make the final. Some doctors will ask me to make a model after we're done with the conversion in case this breaks, and they will break these. So that's just part of the all-on-4 game. A lot of these temporary can fracture or have issues or not teeth out. It could be, an occlusal issue for different reasons, but doctors want me to make some sort of a patty with analogs in the conversion. So they have something to go to, and then we can either, they can fix it in the office if there's an issue, or we can fix it in the lab and without having to take an impression. So I don't do this a lot, but I do have doctors ask me if we can make something like that. And if I was going to make it, I would probably use soft tissue material after I put the analogs on and grab the contour, underneath the contour of this appliance, and so it's captured into my model. Here it's not, it's just piecing it together. Again, the little tiny screws, the prosthetic screws, these are to be torqued at 15 centimeters. And then the day of surgery, you want to fill it with either Tempit, Firmit, composite, impression material. You just want to fill it with something and let the patient go. The patient's going to see the doctor the next day, within the next day or two. If it's on a Friday, probably on Monday, the doctor can, either do some composite, do something a little bit more long-term, and the doctor's probably gonna finalize the bite, adjust the bite, making sure everything's good. It's hard to do it that day, right? Because they're numb, they've been in the chair all day, they've been laying back, and so, we wanna get it as close as possible, if not exact. But if we can't, that can be done at a later point. So, but I like this picture, and I can't remember who the tech I got this from on Facebook, but I love that contour and shape. That's what you're looking for. That's what you're trying to achieve. You don't want food be able to be caught in there in the concavity. You want the patient to be able to go in there with a floss threader. Once the doctor's cleared them to use a floss threader, once the tissue has healed. But you want them to get in there and be able to clean this prosthesis. This is more doctors, surgeon talking about what to use, the day of, the day after, for the first coming months or whatever, if they're using chlorhexidine or what they can use to clean it. I don't typically go in there and tell the patients what to do. That's not my responsibility, and I'm not a doctor. So obviously we leave that up to the surgeon and the restorative doctor. But I wanted to just show you, those are just some of the things that, typically what will happen after the fact. I know this patient looked like they got beat up, right, was the next day after surgery. But I will tell you, they look worse than how they feel. A lot of these patients feel great the next day or 2 or 3 after, because this prosthesis isn't tissue supported, it's implant supported. So they're not having any pressure on that tissue. So they feel really good. I mean, we've even had patients like a week or 2 after surgery break their All-on-4 because they were eating a frozen Snickers bar. And they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be a soft diet, something you can cut with a fork. But these patients, like I said, they may look bad, but they actually feel really good. So I'm not sure how many days after this has been. Obviously, the bruising and swelling's gone down, but she looks pretty good. So again, solid foods can be eaten, but just kind of a modified solid food or soft food diet. Scrambled eggs, fish, pasta, things that cut with a fork. Again, a lot of this is covered by the surgeon or the restorative doctor. I'm not here telling the patient that, but the doctor who's never done this before, they may ask you. And it's just so for your information, if somebody did ever ask or whatever, yeah, we don't want them eating candy bars or pistachios or, things like that, hard crusty breads. We want them eating soft foods so they don't break their temporary. That's one of the other reasons. So again, we don't want to have any sort of concavities. We don't want this, this is not good. This was just horrible. And whoever did that, should be ashamed of themselves that let a patient wear it like that. But are there complications? Yes. I mean, typically it's more fractures because it's an all acrylic appliance with the temp copings that are titanium, but that's why we want soft foods. Now, typically, maybe you may have a patient that is following a soft food diet, but they broke a tooth out or something or fractured it. If you're going to be in this all-on-4 type game, that's to be expected. I mean, it's just, there's pros and cons to everything. And there's a lot of pros to all-on-4, but there's also cons. And, that could be, an argument for anybody, if they like all-on-4, is it too aggressive? Some people love it. I mean, I'm not here to dispute that or kind of go one way or the other. But I think it definitely has a place and it's helped a lot of people. But again, fractures and things are going to happen, and it's not necessarily the lab's fault. It could be the prosthesis too thick or too thin, maybe not enough bone reduction, maybe the denture teeth broke out of the acrylic because that's the weak link, right? The teeth are processed in acrylic with a chemical bond, but sometimes if you know, if the tooth can pop out because maybe the tooth wasn't roughened up before processing, maybe it wasn't heat cured for whatever reason, you know, there are issues, right, that can happen with this. So just be prepared for it. Even when I went to Nobel to learn Nobel clinician, they talked about this. This is one of their, this isn't their slide, but they had a slide similar. That if you're going to get into this game, then repairs are going to be a part of this, I would say, procedure or doing all-on-4s. Temporarily, a doctor could crazy glue that in. They could take an impression and pick that up. You can repair it with mesh. That's not my favorite. But these are just different things that you can do to do repairs, just knowing that. You can use like a Whitmix type of fast setting stone. If you're at an office, time is everything, so use a fast set stone. Again, you're making these models for repair. So some of the complications, you know, if the patient's healthy, you can go ahead and start the final in 4 months. Doctors might say, okay, when can we go ahead and make the final? Well, I always tell them, well, once the surgeon has cleared the patient, is ready to go ahead and do the final, then yeah, then let's go ahead and do that. Typically, it's around 4 months. Some people like to go 6 months. I've seen some people go sooner. But again, that's not up for us as the technicians to decide that. But some of the criteria to follow is if the patient's over 80, maybe if a patient's diabetic or the patient's a smoker, you might want to wait longer than 4 months to go ahead and do the final restoration. So different sounds, you know, sometimes patients will complain that, oh, you know what, I have a hard time saying certain, you know, certain words, you know, S sounds, kind of like a she sound, Victor, you know, they're just different types of things that you can do. You know, if they say, hey, there's an issue, I mean, these are things that you can try to go ahead and fix with the temporary restoration, or something obviously you have to address when you do the final restoration. So these are things that we want to take a look at. And like I said, you'll have access to this. I can send you this so you can read it at your own leisure and have it as a reference for you. But just some of the different things that you could possibly do to help with some of them, helping them form their words properly with their phonetics. Again, this is why we don't want to have concavities. You know, can't get in there and clean it. Everything failed. So without doing this typical conversion, there's other ways of doing it. There are companies out there that now offer fully guided systems. You can have a prosthesis basically ready to go and pick up without even having the patient bite into it. It's all based off the CT scans and models and doing these fully guided systems. Nobel has that to offer. Implant has, you know, fully guided system. Its sequences out there through National Dentex, but I have been chairside to do the conversion for these systems. They're very nice. They're very thorough, very robust systems, very similar to what you're doing, but the prosthesis is already made. It sits on a platform. You inject the material facially to pick up the temp copings, and you're ready to go. You don't even have to have the patient bite into it because it's based off of the models and the scans, and it's all based off of their bite and the models. So these work very well, but these are out there. Just wanted you to be aware. Rowe Dental Lab, well, actually Chrome, they have a system that's fully guided that you can utilize. That works really well. I like that too. And then this is a newer one that's out there. I can't get too much. I know we're almost out of time, but basically what this is, instead of taking a wash inside the denture and drilling 4 access holes, basically you would try the denture over these temporary copings that are screwed in, and they have a plastic screw that screws in, and you basically, it's a little bit more involved than that, but basically what you're doing is loading the denture up with acrylic or some sort of pickup material, and you're seating it over these temp copings, have the patient bite down, wait for it to set, and then basically you pop that denture off. That plastic screw head gives way and allows you to just pull that off, and now you have your 4 temp copings picked up in the denture. You didn't have to drill access holes. You didn't have to open that up. The only thing you may have to do is you could take a wash and making sure that those temporary copings, they come in 2 heights, but you want to make sure they're not interfering and fulcruming on your denture. You want to make sure it's fully tissue supported and not hitting on those temporary copings. So yes, you could still take a wash, relieve that a little bit, but pick that up. And then what you do is you would go ahead and make your access hole from underneath the implant interface. They have a little drill that you go through, and you drill the hole throughout occlusally. It comes out through the occlusal side. And then they have bigger screws, drill bits that you can use to open that up. So you're not taking the time of reaming out these big holes, weakening the denture by taking a lot of acrylic away. It's pretty ingenious, developed by a prosthodontist. I don't have his name offhand, but if you go to smartdentureconversions.com, you can take a look at it, and it's a really nice system. So having said that, Bernie, I baked you or made you a bundt cake for you. I will get that. Actually, it's a Jello mold. I'll get that sent over to you. But anyway, if anybody has any questions, or you know, my email's there, my cell's there. If you want to, you know, contact me and let me know, I'd be more than happy to help. Thank you, everyone.
Mark, great presentation, as always, actually. And there are some questions. There are 6 of them so far. Remember, if you do have questions, please write them in the question and answer box, and Mark will answer them verbally right now. So the first one, Mark, is do we know that when implants are splinted, the retention and far less complications within the interface happens? Your comment.
No, they're supposed to be splinted. I mean, they are supposed to have a cross-arch stabilization. So you are supposed to secure these to all 4 implants. You don't want it just on 1 or 2. You want at least that cross-arch stabilization of 4 minimum. I wouldn't do 3. Now, if you want to do 3, Nobel has the trefoil version. If you're going to do, I believe that's just for the lower. But if you want to do a 3 implant type of thing, you know, that's something that they do have. But if you, like I said, if you go to Nobel's website or you Google it, they'll have all the data you want that shows that cross-arch stabilization, splitting them together the day of surgery, that's what's recommended. So I hope I answered that correctly for you.
Thank you. The next one is, Mark, great surgical footage. What would be the typical lab charge for chairside conversion, per arch or hourly?
Well, I will charge a per arch. So I think we're like around 500 per arch to go out chairside. And if it's a dual arch, then it's about $800, I believe. If I'm going out there the day or after surgery, and I'm going to be there the day of impressioning and mounting and getting all the records to go and start our final, then I charge an hourly rate. I think it's like a couple $100 or whatever. But that's up to you. I mean, you have to figure out what your time is worth and what you want, you know, that makes it worthwhile for you. But I mean, a lot of laboratories have built a lot of business up this way. I mean, you're getting a lot of face time with restorative doctors that may not necessarily use your laboratory now. So you have to look at it that way. It's like, yes, you're getting a fee to cover for you to be out of the office. Maybe, you know, to cover, maybe it doesn't cover all your expenses, but you're also getting your face time with doctors to, you know, they might ask you, oh, do you guys make crowns? Oh, do you guys do implants? Or do you guys, you know, whatever it is, you're getting that face time and you're working with them. You're becoming a team member. You know, I've done some lectures about that, about being part of this team that, you're with the surgeon, you're with the restorative doctor, you're with the implant manufacturer rep, the manufacturer rep you're building a relationship with. You get to know them, and they're going to say, hey, you know what, use Tom from this lab because he's done All-on-4s, he knows what he's doing. So they're your cheerleader, they're referring people to you too. So it's kind of a win-win. And to me, it's also nice to just to be a part of this team. And like I said, at the end, the day of surgery, and you see these people leave and they're looking in the mirror for the first time and, see people crying. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm a softie, but I love that. I love being at, I don't feel I was a big part. I just feel I was a small part of that, obviously. But it still makes me feel good because I think as technicians, we're in the lab, we're at the bench. And for years, we don't really see the patient much except for a custom shave maybe, but seeing this is really well worth it. I'm really happy with it.
All right. Next question mark is, do you give any credence to the Shimbashi measurement? If so, where between 15 to 18 millimeters do you desire to land, or does the initial VDO measurement you conducted on the face trump the Shimbashi?
Well, I mean, typically what I like to do is, when we're ready to start the final restoration, is what I'll do is I want the final impression. We make a soft tissue model. I make a verification jig. I make a screw retained bite ram with 2 temporary copings in it so they can screw both sides typically. And I have them, get that information. And then it's not until they send it back that I can get the case mounted. And then I look at my restorative space and I measure from the crest of the ridge, the healed tissue now, right? It's all healed. I measure from the crest of the ridge to the occlusal plane to the opposing. And typically we want 15 millimeters is what we need. We have to have enough room for the metal substructure. We have to have enough room, certain thickness of acrylic. We have to have enough room for those teeth to get in there. Have I seen them with less? I mean, I've seen some of these cases in 9 or 10 millimeters of space. And it's like, well, we can't open the bite. We can't, do anything. We have to make it it's not going to be an all-on-4. Now it's going to be a compromised type of restoration, really. I mean, you could do a zirconia, but I think even with zirconia, people, I think we like to be around 12 millimeters. Now, having said it, have I done it a little less because that's what we had to work with? Yes. Has it worked? Yes. Have I done zirconias with 15 or more space and have they broken? Yes. I mean, sometimes they have. I mean, it just varies, but I mean, typically you want that 15 millimeters of space. If you don't, then, again, I think that's why zirconia became popular because it gave us an option that we could utilize, this prostheses for maybe limited spacing. Now, like I said, when you're trying to do these crystal ultras or pectin type cases, individual crowns, things like that, you definitely need that space. And the other thing is what happens that could happen is a doctor could send you this case, you get it mounted, and this was the plan for an all-on-4 the whole time. And maybe there wasn't enough alveolar-plasty done, bone reduction, and you don't have a lot of space. Well, now you can say, doctor, well, I can make you zirconia, but I don't have room for an all-on-4 bar. The issue is well, now instead of a $3,000 to $4,000, whatever you charge for an all-on-4, now you're doing a zirconia, and now you're starting in that $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 range. So now you got to go back to the patient, or I don't know how that works, but now you have a higher fee for your restoration. And so sometimes that wasn't in the plan, right? So they're like, well, this patient's already paid and this is what we're getting. And this is why I like doing these fully guided systems or working with people that have, that are surgeons that understand that and making sure that we get enough restorative space at the end. So the restorative doctor, it's not a headache for them. Typically it's not an issue for the surgeon, right? Because the implants are in, they're put in nice, they're put in properly, but maybe there wasn't enough bone taken away. So now it becomes an issue. So, but yes, typically, to answer your question, I measure from the crest of the ridge. I don't care where the implant's placed, unless the implant happens to be very super gingival, by 3, 4, or 5 millimeters, then obviously it's something you need to look at. But typically that hasn't been the issue. Typically it's the implants are fine, but it's the restorative space.
Okay, we got a few more questions. Mark, what percentage of arches do you recommend angling the most posterior implant 30 degrees to increase the AP?
Well, typically it's angled because you're trying to avoid, on the lower, you're trying to avoid the nerve. Okay, so you're angling it back as far as you can, that 30 degree, so you could at least get second by for smaller occlusion with your cantilever. When you do the final on the upper, sometimes the reason you're doing that is you're trying to avoid the sinus. The sinus kind of comes down, so what you're trying to do is avoid that. So on the upper, those posteriors are kind of angled back as far as they can to avoid the sinus. Now, fully guided systems with CT scans, sometimes I've seen, where we case plan cases where we don't angle any. We have the space, there's not an issue with the sinus, or we have plenty of vertical or plenty of bone to get an implant in. We're not going to be anywhere near the nerve, but typically that's why you're angling these, because you're trying to make this all-on-4 more cost-effective for the patient. Otherwise, you're doing a sinus lift. You're having them go through, trying to do maybe replacing bone, and they got to do bone healing, things like that. You don't want. That's kind of why they invented this and did it that way, to kind of avoid some of that certain anatomy. So it was more of a cost-effective full mouth restoration.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Mark, do you have any experience with osteodensification? If so, what are your thoughts on the technique, and does it necessarily improve the ability to immediately load and establish proper insertion torque values? Versa is the most common one.
I don't believe I do. What did you say it was?
Osteodensification.
I do not. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. Versa, I guess, is the most common one, is what he said. All right. Next question. Do you cut temporary copings before you connect the dentures to them so occlusion is not interfered?
Correct, yes. So what I'll do is I don't cut them until we put them in. We seat the denture with the 4 holes through it, and we seat it. We have the patient bite down, and if we see that they can't bite completely together, and it's interfering on the temp coping, then yes, I have them remove that, and then I go ahead and I cut it down, and then I bring it back to them, put it in, and we're fine. Ideally, like I said, we really don't want to be cutting those down. When I start having to cut them down, I get worried. Now, sometimes in the anterior, you might be beveling them because you've got that lingual aspect and you can bevel that cylinder. You're cutting it down that way. But if it's in the posteriors, and I'm, like I said, if it's 1 or 2 millimeters, I'm okay. I have to be, right. We're at this point, there's no turning back. I have to get this done. But if I know that I'm cutting them a lot more than that, I know in my mind that, oh, this is going to be an issue come when we do the restorative. And so it's a hard decision to have, or a hard discussion to have at that time, because now you're at the surgeon's office, possibly. You don't want to say, hey, the surgeon didn't take enough bone down or reduced enough bone, and now, you're not going to, this is going to be a problem down the road. So, I don't really say anything then, but if I talk to the restorative doctor later, or I may say, hey, you know what, by cutting these down, we're going to have to look at our restorative space when you're ready to do the final here, because, typically you may have an issue with space, and we may not be able to do a typical all-on-4. Now it's going to be a more expensive prosthetic. So.
Okay. Next question. If you don't have sufficient restorative space for the prescribed type of restorative material or prosthesis, will you inform the doctor that because it's contraindicated and no
Yeah,
warranty applies,
yeah.
or how would you handle it? Yes.
Yeah, typically, yes. I mean, that's what I do all day long. I'm on the phone. I'm talking to these doctors of, orchestrating these big full arch cases, and looking at them, looking at the space that we have, and we have that discussion. We try to see what we can do. Possibly, what we might do is if we need to open the bite a little bit, we might do a digital or a diagnostic setup, set some teeth in wax, do some sort of a try-in to see, like, okay, is the patient okay with that opening? Can we design our restoration around this VDO where the teeth are positioned? If not, then if they know this is where then typically we're trying to come up with something, maybe a Montreal bar, that's a metal, highly polished substructure. And then maybe I just get, process the teeth in the acrylic on top of it. Possibly I've been able to do that. Sometimes I've done it where it's metal occlusal, where I send it off and have Pantera mill, a metal substructure, highly polished intaglio, and some metal occlusals, and maybe we just might do some composite facings, and composite anteriors where, if the patient's really aggressive and they don't have a lot of room, we know they're not going to break that. And if they do fracture or chip a composite, at least that's something that's easily repairable in the chair and not necessarily having to come back to the lab. Now, we've done that probably, 4 or 5 times for certain doctors, because obviously not everybody wants metal occlusals, in their posterior, but sometimes you don't have a choice. So it's, it is a discussion that we have every day with these types of cases. We're probably doing, maybe, 5 to 10 cases a day like this that we're starting and choreographing and trying to decide, okay, what can we make? And we don't really make that decision, like I said, until they take the final impression. We do a bite rim and verification jig, make sure our model impression's great, and then maybe even do some sort of a diagnostic setup for them to try in. And then once that's accepted, now I can say, okay, let me measure, let me scan this, let me see what sort of space they have, and let's come up with some sort of a plan of what we can make and what that's going to run.
Okay. Now, the person responsible for several of the questions that you just answered made a comment, said, really great presentation, Mark. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience, much appreciated. And it's our good friend Kent Coley. So thank you, Kent, for being with us and for asking the questions. Now, we have one more person who's a good friend of ours who has asked a couple questions. That's Craig Pickett. Craig, great to know you're on here. I hope all is well with you. Craig says, thanks, Mark. Great as always. Pickett, review the magic numbers again. 15, 30 to 35, etc.
Yeah, so the restorative space for a typical All-on-4, you want 15 millimeters. Like I said, I measure from the crest of the ridge to where the occlusal plane or the incisal edges will be. That's kind of the magic number there. As far as implant torque, you want about 30 Newton centimeters when the doctor is inserting or placing the implant. They have to make sure they get at least that torque value. Sometimes it's higher, which is great, but if it spins or if it's, then no, you cannot do the conversion. You have to cover it, put it to sleep, bury it, let that patient go home with the denture, and they have to wear a denture for 4 months or whatever it is until the implants have healed. You don't want to just do the conversion while the implant is that loose, because they're just going to lose that implant anyway, and then you're going to have to place another one. It's just better off to do it right the first time. And then as far as magic numbers, every company is a little different on their torque values as far as for their screws. So I would look with different manufacturers, but I know with Nobel, the straight abutment, when the doctors are putting those on the implant, the straight multi-unit abutment, that'll be torqued at 35. If it's an angled multi-unit abutment, then that screw to screw in the multi-unit abutment, that's a 15 millimeter torque. And all the prosthetic screws, the little tiny screw that you use to screw down and deliver your final prostheses for Nobel, those are 15 also. So I think BioHorizons is a little bit different. I think for their multi-unit abutment angled, I think they still recommend, I believe it's 30 Newton centimeter. They're not 15. So, but like I said, just check with your manufacturer as far as, but the main number is 15 restorative space.
Yeah. All right. Craig has one more question. Have you done zygomatic implant restorations when the sinus floor was too?
I have actually. I do find that, at least with some of the doctors that I've dealt with, one in particular downtown at North, anyway, somebody downtown, but yeah, they do a lot. And I typically find that you might find in the posterior, obviously where it's placed, it might be a little bit more palatable. Sometimes I see it a little bit more towards the ridge, around the ridge, but don't be surprised if you feel or you see these where the implant is a little bit more palatable than what you would normally see on an All-on-4. But basically, you're still doing your conversion the same way. Nothing changes. The only difference is obviously the doctor, the surgeon who, you know, is placing that. Obviously, they're probably very experienced and a good, obviously, very good surgeon if they're doing zygomatic. But yeah, you can do that.
Interesting stuff. Well, I just want to repeat for everybody who's still with us that in about a day or so, you'll be receiving a thank you email from us. And with that will be a way to get your CDT credit for recertification. It's going to consist of a simple true and false test. So hopefully you've been listening to most, if not all, of Mark's presentation. So that will be there. And remember, this has been recorded, so you can always do that within a day or so. We'll have it up on the website in the webinar section. We can go for the certification anytime really after that. So I want to thank you so much, Mark, for another great presentation. I certainly appreciate your making that delicious looking bundt cake for me. Like it's being eaten from the inside, but
yeah, right.
Hope there's some left by the time I get it. So hey, thanks again. You've done a wonderful job, and we thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Look forward to having you all with us at a future WhipMix webinar. Thank you and take care.